Hey everybody, welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. We're in part two of talking about this beautiful book, 400 Friends and No One to Call, Breaking Through Isolation and Building Community. So we were talking in the first section how people are feeling both isolated with stay-at-home orders as well as lonely and the difference between those things, between
Yeah.
isolation and loneliness. And at the end of that, we were talking about how we're facing new territory and how we want to have meaningful conversations, yet we are not well equipped to have those conversations. And
Mm-hmm.
I can talk about my own experience, and I was wondering if you could share with me what you're learning. But my own experience is, I had a friend who I have some friends in New York who literally every single friend knows someone that has died or in the
Oh
hospital
my
and
God.
not doing well.
Mm.
I don't, you don't really know what to say because people are dying on multiple, like they're dealing with multiple deaths of friends that have contracted COVID. I just talked to a friend of mine who has parents in Moscow, and she's in the States, and her dad is in Moscow, and like she can't do anything. She feels helpless aside from talking to her mother, who is extremely distraught. She really can't do anything, and her father has been on death's door almost for the last month. He's recovered, but they put every single time they're trying some type of new intervention, which then made the COVID symptoms better, but then caused like other symptoms from taking those
Oh God.
experimental drugs worse. So kind of seesawing back and forth with symptoms. I've had some people who are worried about like they've lost their jobs and they don't really know when they're going to go back to work
Yeah.
and what the new life will be like. I mean, for me, I had a whole bunch of gigs lined up, all of which just fell apart in a day. And so there's just this kind of how do you deal with loss on multiple levels and how do you comfort someone and have a meaningful then the other ones are for people who have kids at home who are homeschooling their kids while working a job and can barely breathe. Like when I'm coaching, my clients are like I can hear them going through. Like I can feel just this kind of can't even think with their executive functioning because they're
Oh
just in
yes.
survival mode.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so and then I've kids. I have a kid who just started his freshman year. And so he was just starting his social life, getting going and kind of flying from the nest and
Mm.
individuating and is now like back at home with his parents and feeling like he just started building his social network and is not even sure when he's going back. I have another kid who's going to be a senior and is not sure if he'll be even back.
Oh no.
Or people who are
Mm.
graduating from high school couldn't see any of their friends. I mean, there's just so many of these scenarios.
So much.
How do you even
Yes.
listen in a way that is comforting?
What was overwhelming just listening to you? I mean, wow. We're all being really overwhelmed. Look at all the things you just mentioned. I think that's pretty typical for us. Macro and micro levels dealing with this. The uncertainty and the change, the drastic change in our lives. But I will say one thing, that whole thing called checking in, that whole thing where you reach out and check in. So, not to sound too formulaic, but let's just say it's time to reach out to somebody on your mind, just either calling or however you want to do the reach out piece. But first of all, say, I've had you on my mind. Say something like, how are you holding up? I'm wondering how you're doing these days. So, what you're going to do is reach out with a very open ended question, you know, and there are lots of ways to reach out that way. And I would actually really encourage, I think it helps us to write down people that we're thinking about so we don't overlook certain people that we might even be more concerned about, who might be more isolated or dealing with more loss than you are. So make a list, and at least if you could do a check in, and a lot of people might just want to be checked in with once every week for a few minutes. A lot of people don't want a lot of checking in, but boy, do they welcome just that they're being thought about. So check in. There are ways to check in. There are different ways to check in and ask people not only how are they holding up, but if they have had a loss, please acknowledge that loss. Acknowledgement is huge in terms of offering comfort to people. Oh, I heard that they've had to close down your business. How are you doing with this? So acknowledge the loss, ask how they're holding up, and then you might say, I just have really been thinking of you, and I'd like to be able to stay in touch with you over the next few weeks. So you always want to make a plan with that person. Would you like would you like me to check in once a week, or would you like to call me back, or set up a way where you can follow up a little bit? But a check-in list is good to have.
Mm.
And it makes you feel better, and it's actually nice to get it like a little routine. Like, here's who I'm going to call today. Here's what I'm going to do tomorrow. It gives you a little bit of structure. So the checking in thing helps. So does just good old-fashioned helping somebody. If it's just a neighbor or a relative or a woman at a senior center that you know, that you're doing something in particular in your community to help, volunteering and helping people really takes anxiety out of us. There's much, much science to show when you choose to help someone, especially if you know they're more isolated or possibly maybe suffering even more than you. I don't want to make it sound like a quick fix, but actually the act of helping makes us feel less helpless.
Right.
The act of reaching out. And in fact, this was a huge part of my book. It was a huge breakthrough in my book. I call it my Boston Not So Strong story. My book talks about a woman who had a son who was at the Boston Marathon bombing who saw his friend get blown up.
Oh gosh.
And at the time, I was feeling very helpless. That particular coworker at my job where I started out in Boston did not like me.
Oh.
I thought she wanted me fired, and I'd only been there 1 month. So who was I to open up to her? But I just thought she looked so miserable a few days after the bombing. We had been locked down too. So when we went back to work, I saw a huge change in her. I knew something was wrong. So I used my sense of caring. I just knew something was wrong. So I asked her how she was doing, and she started telling me her story. And the point that I'm trying to get to is her son ended up telling her, Mom, it's not really about Boston strong. It's not about being strong. It's more about showing up, even if you don't know what to say or what to do. And that son was having a hard time going to see his friend in the hospital. The whole reason the mom was talking to me is I can't get my boy to go see his friend in the hospital. He's too freaked out. He's afraid he's going to do and say the wrong thing. But a few days later, after this woman had talked with me, she was able to convince him to go. And it made me feel so good that
Mm.
I had helped convince her son to go. And then her son got so much out of it and said, I'm really glad I went. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But you know what happened? Not only was his friend at the hospital, but the friends in the same ward, a unit where he was at the hospital, who were also injured, they started partying with her son in the hospital. They were so glad to have a visitor. So
Mm.
he broke through his isolation.
Mm.
So I began to see that when you give support, even if you don't feel qualified, that's how that breakthrough happens. It's
Mm.
by reaching out,
Mm.
even if you feel clueless. And this is a time in particular where it's okay to feel clueless. We're all in this together. We have a good excuse not to know what to say. We have a good excuse not to know what to do. We certainly really, don't have good advice we can offer because this is all so new to us. So it's put us in a position where we can be really receptive to each other and listen and learn from each other. But I don't want to make it sound rosy. It's hard. But in the good side of it is that we're in this where we are sort of muddling through together. So think of it as being companions with each other as you muddle through.
Yeah, and I think actually like my son was saying, here's what's happening, and I I couldn't answer anything. It's like I don't
Right.
know when you're going to go back to school. I would feel I don't know exactly what you're feeling, but I can imagine what you may be feeling. You know that your freshman year started. You know all these kinds of things. But I didn't really know what to say. But I think just repeating back and hearing him and
Right.
saying and I don't even know if I didn't want to put any ideas in his head like, oh, are you feeling helpless or are you feeling like uncertain, like I didn't really know.
Right.
I mean, what would you, because we don't know what to say or what to do when someone has lost their job or someone has someone who's not doing well. I mean, what what do you just say, I don't know what to say? And
Well, it's funny. Usually, when a person starts to talk, follow their lead. What lit them up when they were talking? It sounds like that helped you when you talked about that. Or, boy, it sounds, follow what that person's saying, and you step into not trying to fix it, not trying to cheer them up.
mhm,
That's what we think comforting means. We're supposed to make that person feel better.
mhm,
Believe me, it's if we can possibly step out of trying to fix it and make the person feel better and just be present to them and listen to it and just feel, it's empathy and empathic listening, but asking open-ended questions. So what happened after that, say? Or when you tried that, what happened after that? Just explore with them, get them to keep the narrative going, however they felt comfortable talking about it. That
mm,
might sound really general, but in it's better to take what they've said and actually you show them that you're listening by repeating some of what they said and asking more about it.
mm,
So you might want to stay away from the feeling stuff because they might not feel quite ready to talk about the feelings. But, so what did you do? Get them to think about what they'd like to try to do next time or what they might have learned from it. Um, but, just showing your care and listening.
mhm,
And oh, by the way, it doesn't all happen at once. It might be little bits at a time
mm,
when you check in with that person. A lot of us think we have to have that big heart to heart, like work through it. But actually, a lot of times it's more a matter of little bits at a time. People often need little steps to processing their stuff and they can't like wrap their mind around it for too long. So like little check-ins throughout the day. How's it
mm.
going now? So you might find even just keeping your conversation when you check in, um, just follow their lead. If they want to talk a lot more, go there. If they don't want to talk a lot more, believe me, you'll come back around to it. You
All right.
will. It comes back around.
I love it. Okay. So we've been talking to Val Walker about her book, 400 Friends and No One to Call. Specifically, we've been talking about in this part the importance of just checking in. You know, people are feeling isolated and just have a check in call list of people that you call, listen, and just be present. How can you come up with solutions necessarily or fix it when there's so many variables unknown? And so we're in a
That's
different
right.
a different place
You
than
know,
we used to be.
yeah, and when you let people think out loud and process, they're more likely to come up with their own solution. If you know what I'm saying, they just need to air it out. We're so overwhelmed. We just need that space. It's like holding space for someone.
Yeah,
It's really, we might not solve anything at that point, but emotions have to go somewhere.
right.
We're
And I
giving it that space.
and I think the idea of like, and don't expect miracles. It may be lots
Right.
of check-ins throughout the day, which I think sometimes
That's
it's
right.
like, did I solve it? Did I solve it? You know,
Right.
like, it's like there's first
That's
of all,
right.
there's nothing to solve, and second of all, like I can say with my own emotions over the period of time, it's like an unpacking. So if you talked to me yesterday and asked me how I was feeling, and talking to me now and ask like literally day in, day out, I'm coming to more insight with respect to what's really going on. So if you asked me yesterday, I wouldn't have known. I just knew I felt off, you know?
And also go with what they love doing, what makes them feel better. Just sitting around with somebody who's watching one of their favorite shows or listening to their favorite music, just quietly enjoying the same stuff they are, that builds great connection. It really
Right.
does, because it's like no pressure. We're just hanging together.
Yes.
And one thing this crisis is doing for us is it's teaching us how to just hang together again. I think a lot of us got out of practice. We have to have quality time all the time. It's now like, all right, we're just hanging and we're just going to see what happens. We're going to enjoy this music. We're going to enjoy this show. We're going to play this game.
Yeah.
So,
Chilling out,
sharing
as what my
stuff.
my son would call it, chilling. At my age, it was like
That's right.
vegging out. It's just like no
Right.
plan, no talking. We don't have to talk about anything. We can
Right.
just sit here quietly and watch a show that we're enjoying or cut carrots. Like it really doesn't have to
Right.
be.
And I find with people who don't like to talk, it's those little times where you're cutting carrots or folding laundry where something pops out of them and they say something. It's like, oh, now they're going to talk about it. Because it's like when great ideas come to you when you're in the shower. You're not trying to, with all this pressure on us to solve everything and get through this, it's really nice to just allow each other for things, little surprises along the way.
I love it. Okay, so in the next segment, I want to talk a little bit more about specific sections that you have in your book. Thank you so much for being here.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show and would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.